Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's BTS talk. In this session, Jules Lancy will speak about digital health for space exploration. Jules is a biomedical engineer and a healthcare innovator and advisor in a medical training center. He will let us know more about his professional journey and first-hand experience with digital health. At the end of this talk, we'll have some minutes dedicated to Q&As, so you can write your questions and we'll read them at the end of this talk. Also, we'll have an open chat if you want to participate. So I will leave the floor to Jules. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. So do you see my screen?
Yes, perfect. We can see it.
Okay, great. All right. So welcome and thanks for being here today. My name is Jules Lancy, and to set the context of today, part of my work is in healthcare innovation for a university medical center in the Netherlands called the Radboud UMC, as you can see here, exploring the future of health and care. And today I'd like to take you into space using some of the lessons we learned in healthcare on Earth, where I mainly look at emerging technologies. So who am I talking to you at Barcelona Technology School? I'm an engineer myself. I went to Eindhoven University of Technology, but what does that really mean? As you can see here in this dictionary explanation, we might be called wizards, magicians, and that happened quite literally with me when I was talking about complicated topics like artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, etc. in the hospital environment. And that's how I got to be known as the biomagical engineer rather than the biomedical engineer. A little bit about my background. I went to International Space University, where among other things, we investigated how space-enabled technologies or capabilities help mitigate pandemics on Earth. So really relevant. Here you see our mission patch. I'm also affiliated with the Space Generation Advisory Council. That is a network organization for young professionals in the space industry that comes out of the United Nations to help provide the UN with policy advice on space coming from the next generation. I helped set up the project group on space medicine and life sciences and started the Health in Space series, of which I'll tell you a little bit more later. So let's go into space. 2 years ago, SpaceX presented the Starship. You see it here. It's this huge ship that on top of a rocket will bring groups of 100 people per flight to Mars. This month, a couple of test flights have been performed, where you see the rocket reaching record highs and returning back to Earth in more or less successful ways. NASA, the American Space Agency, is targeting 2024 for humans to set foot on the moon again, after we last did almost a century ago. They vision the moon as a stepping stone to our human missions to Mars. And here you see an image by SpaceX, again, showing how we might venture out into deep space. And we have seen many recent plans for human spaceflight, both commercial and non-commercial. And it's about right to say that humankind will go on more and longer duration space missions. A lot of engineering research is going into rockets and other technological advancement. But when we go to Mars, just as important as getting there will be getting there alive and healthy. And that's not a trivial problem, especially when we will go on deep space missions to Mars and beyond. We will run into some basic limitations. For one, there will be communication delays. It takes about 20 minutes before your message to get across to the surface of the planet Mars. And if you want to reply, it takes 20 minutes to take your message back to Earth. We also will have limited medical equipment on board due to limitations in mass, volume, electricity. but also limited medical skills and thus expertise. Of course, a doctor can come along, but also the doctor can become sick. What do you do then? And of course, at last, there is no emergency evacuation possible. Right now, in the International Space Station, when something really bad happens, you could go back in a matter of hours or within a day. But when you are on your way to Mars, it is almost physically impossible right now to turn your ship around and return to home, to Earth. That's no longer an option. And therefore, we will need a sense of medical autonomy for those astronauts on the go. Of course, we will send the most healthy human beings on such a mission, but a 3-year trip is a long time to stay healthy in the extreme environment of outer space. So what do you do if a crew member breaks a leg when first stepping off that Mars lander ladder? Or what if someone develops appendicitis? Can you do surgery in space? Or how do you detect someone developing a heart problem due to the absence of gravity? If not physical problems, then also psychological issues can become a risk to the success of the mission that the crew themselves will need to deal with. And on that psychological health aspect, anecdotal evidence suggests that missions can be divided in quarters. In the first quarter, everything is new and individuals are excited about their experience, their new experience. While in the second quarter, they begin to experience some routine. Crucial, however, is the third quarter, and it's also called the third quarter phenomenon, where boredom arises and small issues tend to lead to irritations between crew members, and therefore most conflicts are experienced during this time. And as a crew of 6, which is a usual number for such early missions, you might have had enough sometimes of the other 5 phases around you. You may want to talk about stress relief. So in this extreme environment and the scarcity of resources, this requires an innovative approach. How do we deal with health and medical problems when no one is around, when you are left to your own? So in this quest for medical autonomy, I argue we can learn from trends in healthcare and healthcare innovation on Earth. So, okay, let's take a little break from our journey to Mars and the third quarter phenomenon and all the physical and psychological problems we might run into. And first, let me take you shortly on a trip back to Earth and back in time. I'm going to discuss healthcare on Earth with you. And in this short overview of the history of discoveries in healthcare, a lot has happened since Hippocrates worked out the oath for medical professionals. So you can see, for example, we've managed to overcome the Black Plague. We invented X-rays. We have the first vaccines already centuries ago. Of course, the discovery of DNA. But none of those developments, however, were as fundamental as the last one that I add now, which is the advent of digital health technologies. By becoming digital, solutions for healthcare have become smaller, faster, cheaper, and in some cases even smarter. And then I'm talking about solutions leveraging artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, blockchain, voice recognition, 3D printing. And those are just some of the technologies that are impacting healthcare right now. So this is something that our grandparents might have seen while in surgery theater back in their young days. Some of our doctors, of our generation doctors, started working in a theater like this, maybe. But when you need surgery today, you get to our state-of-the-art surgery theaters full of technology, many options for diagnosis and treatment. So how does this fit in with that statement that things are becoming smaller, cheaper, faster, and smarter? Well, for that, let me take you through a couple of shifts that we see happening in healthcare and name you some examples. In general, you could say that things are shifting from being centered around the system, healthcare as a system, towards the person. And so the first thing that I'd like to discuss is how we've always called it healthcare, but it really is sick care. You go to the doctor when you become sick. It is reactive rather than proactive, rather than preventing disease from happening. So how do we see that and happening? So we humans are keeping track of more and more of our activities, of our health, of our environment. We are wearing all kinds of sensors in our house, on our bodies, tracking our sports, etc. And most of you have seen apps like these, for example. We are tracking our steps with our phone. You can measure your sleep, also your heart rate, just with apps on your phone. And that's nice and all, but what can you do with that information? Well, for one example, researchers came up with an algorithm, or rather let artificial intelligence come up with an algorithm that analyzes all kinds of these personal data and is able to predict whether someone might suffer from a migraine attack soon. So this is using health and environmental data to prevent sickness from happening rather than reacting to it. And many will probably have seen these devices, some call them gadgets, but from entertainment medicine, these have developed into devices that are useful in healthcare. And what is remarkable, many of these devices used to only belong to the medical domain, but are now for sale in consumer electronics. And that makes that we will be able to provide care on health in a more personalized way rather than in a one-size-fits-all approach. And to take this from another angle, here I'm showing you the costs of sequencing the genome, the human genome, and how they have dropped exponentially over the last 20 years. It's a drastic decrease in costs. And this means that 5 years ago, we could even do this as part of a conference. I was at Exponential Medicine conference in 2016, so 5 years ago, where at day one, we got a kit to hand in a little bit of saliva. On day 3, at the end of the conference, the whole audience had their results, and they analyzed a couple of genome sequence parts. And for example, this part of my DNA, these are my actual results, showed that I have a rare copy of a gene that is associated with a slower than average caffeine metabolism. So which means that, for example, coffee would stay longer in my system if this is really how it works out in my body. But of course, these are no simple matters. So these complex products have a way to go to explain to their customers better what they actually mean and do. But these are the first steps because it becomes so much cheaper. So here's to another cup of coffee. Showing a simple example here, but these insights, with these insights, we might tailor our care better. And these are just consumer products now. You can buy these kits from the internet or in some shops, and they are not just for the ordinary consumer. You can now also test the genes of your pet. Here's an actual example of a kit that you can buy for testing your cat's DNA. Quite interesting. And a different way of employing AI, artificial intelligence, for the benefit of a personalized approach. Knowing that you have all these characteristics of people on the genome level even, one might be able to personalize drugs. And will that be with a lab full of people testing molecules? Well, not quite. As you can see here, where researchers found a way to synthesize a new drug in 46 days. This is a drastic improvement of this process that makes it a lot faster. So we are seeing a movement towards proactive and personalized healthcare. And next to that, in the future, healthcare might not or no longer be centered around the institutions like the one that I work for example. So the institutions that I work for and those hospitals that we know, the healthcare systems that we have, are built on these physical things. Yes, even fax machines are still being used in many hospitals around the world. But we have these buildings and the people walking around, and some even with paper files. And of course, for some treatments, we need bulky machines and highly specialized equipment. But we might not need those traditional bulky institutions around them anymore when healthcare is built around you. Here, using an example of Amazon now testing new models of care for their employees, which is just one of many new players that are coming to this market. And using all their technology development, they will try to find a better way to care for their employees at first, but this will open up for general consumers, I'm sure. And they are using their superiority in logistics, because healthcare comes down to a lot of logistics, and who knows better than companies like Amazon, for example. So I mentioned things getting smaller and faster. In the upper left of this slide, you see a traditional heart examination using electrodes on the chest. And over the years, they have become integrated in a product, in a sticker that you can put at the back of your phone, holding it with two hands, and creating the same level of quality heart examination as you had with all those electrodes on the chest, for which you need to go to the hospital often. And this you can do from your home or wherever you are when you have your phone with you. From your phone, it moved to your wristwatch, being able to measure your heart rhythm throughout the day. And then eventually maybe even this business card format. Of course, this is a gimmick, but who knows where this will go, right? Where does it lead? Well, it will fit your eye, making technology less visible. This lens was created by Google some years ago, measuring glucose in your tears. It was bought by a pharma company called Novartis. Afterwards, we haven't heard of it anymore, so we don't know what the stages of this development. The lens was real. Here's again a gimmick, but all these demonstrate that this health technology is becoming more personal and well, decentralized. You don't need to go to the hospital for these diagnosis or monitoring, etc. So as these forms of care become more physically decentralized, we can also start to offer them more continuously. Instead of going to the doctor episodically for your checkup, we're now collecting health information through our products, whether it's our Apple Watch or apps on your phone, as I showed in the beginning. And also in our hospitals, we see this miniaturized versions of electronics, like a smart patch that is measuring all kinds of information on your health of your body, like heart rate here, respiration rate, posture, skin temperature, etc. Heart rhythm variability as well is what we looked into. And this is describing similar trends as in other sectors. For example, to take a quick jump to the financial world, here's how Wall Street changed from a place where there used to be a lot of people walking around and handling information into a place like this, where there's a lot of screens and a lot less people handling the same kind of information. Now, we don't have to wait for this to see happening in healthcare, because here you see the example of a nurse in a US hospital helping out staff on the ground by looking at the vital signs of hundreds of patients at the same time. This means that we are collecting a lot of data. We love data, apparently, in healthcare. But what can we do with it? Not always a lot yet, but we are getting there. And we more and more let algorithms find out. And that's why I love this next example about people with diabetes. Diabetes type 1 is a very high burden of disease, has a very high burden of disease with many decisions making during the day involving your disease. And now diabetes type 1 patients have hacked their glucose monitor and their insulin pump to create the world's first artificial pancreas. An algorithm looks at their glucose levels and determines how much insulin is needed and moves forward autonomously. This has grown into an online movement called We Are Not Waiting, where the designers of this piece of technology, or the patients, have shared the blueprints of this solution. So every patient with these devices can recreate it for themselves. It's an example of patients taking control over their health and taking it into their own hands. Here's a picture of one of the founders of this movement called Dana Lewis, with her solution and after running a marathon using her artificial pancreas, not worrying about her diabetes. So the impact of smaller, cheaper, faster, smarter technologies have resulted in seeing these shifts in healthcare, again, going from a reactive system to a more preventative system, from a one-size-fits-all healthcare to precision medicine. And most importantly, you see a shift in power. The relationship between the doctor and his or her patients is changing from a more dependent relationship into a partnership, in which the patient or the citizen is empowered with technology to take care of its own health and medical issues. And now thinking back to that astronaut on the go that needs to take care of their health and medical issues themselves, this is just a reminder. I'd like to show you this last shift, because historically, healthcare has grown to be centered around this provider. The doctor knows all, of course, right? Well, that may not always be the case anymore, as we've seen with these diabetes patients. And as we see that terrestrial patients are becoming more autonomous when it comes down to their health and care, it is this change that is also needed for astronauts on their way to Mars. A different relationship between astronauts and their doctors in mission control is needed, and this can be achieved by leveraging these new health technologies. In this way, both worlds can learn a lot from each other. And most of the previously shown solutions are being used on Earth already, but could just as well be transformed for something to something for space. And so for this last shift, the shift in power, really giving the power to the person rather than the system or the earthbound doctor, let me give you some compelling terrestrial examples. The first signs of technologies coming in the hands of patients or people rather than professionals are tools like this triage app called Babylon Health. Based on you giving symptoms in a simple chat, it is able to make diagnoses using artificial intelligence that is already matching its human peers in terms of safety and accuracy. And it's doing so 24/7. It says, we don't close. This app is even branding itself for space already, saying it doesn't matter that if you're in bed, at work, or on the other side of the world. And by the way, this is not a simple thing. Lots of research, of course, goes into this service, and this company is currently valued at over $2 billion. Or this one. This is Tess. Tess is a psychological coach that you can chat with. She's an artificial intelligence that employs traditional cognitive behavioral therapy methods to talk with you about fears, about dealing with disease, about stress, about other mental issues. And that means real-time access to personalized care that is continuously available. And this is fascinating, right? This appears to be working. While we were working on this in a hospital on Earth, we even started talking about Tess as a her and a she. This is being tested around the world as we see a growing population of people dealing with symptoms of depression, and also a growing population of seniors in most of the Western world that are dealing with loneliness. And while the previous example was already getting quite personal, giving the feeling you are texting with a real person, this feels like a real person. It is a digital human that acts and reacts in real time as a real person. Translate this to this situation on Mars. Talking without delays to your virtual doctor, your human-like doctor. Or when you are 2 years into your mission and want to talk to someone else than the 5 other faces that have been around you for 2 years already. And here I show you a live example, or not live, it's a video example of this. This is an example by Soul Machines, which is a company that creates digital humans for all kinds of industries and also for healthcare. And these are just a couple of examples of how advanced artificial intelligence is already a reality. But there are so many more centered around health and care around the world. And I work in healthcare innovation where we see these developments, and they will surely benefit those deep space astronauts. And I'd like to show you this overview here of many more AI companies, artificial intelligence companies that are taking over bits and bytes of the healthcare spectrum. And as you can see in the schematic, this shows you all kinds of work and tasks that are traditionally being done in a hospital or in a healthcare institution. And the number of companies that have taken just a part of that task or a part of that work and try to do it better, leveraging the power of this technology. And my former colleague Zeina Kayat called this the unbundling of the hospital. Because what does it mean for us in the hospital? Will we start working with these companies, or will patients work with these companies? But again, I get back to what it means to be digital. It means that it virtually does not take up any space. So what would it mean if you could stand on the surface of Mars with all of this in your pocket? And these developments are not only available commercially, this is also being researched, of course. And it turns out that AI coaching, artificial intelligence coaching, can be just as effective, at least in certain disease areas, as human comparison. And of course, this rapidly evolves into more capable functions as well. Earlier, I showed you the example of Tess. Here are some other commercially available AI coaches and most of their taglines amuse me. So we have here Wobots, says no couches, no mats, no childhood stuff, just strategies to improve your mood and the occasional dorky joke. And the other one is called Wisa, which says that it is your 4 a.m. friend and AI life coach. So that's quite the statement, of course. And we might not prescribe these bots to patients yet, but people will try them themselves. And again, imagine how this might help this team of astronauts, or even the first hundreds that are far from home, dealing with their own issues in real time. And then looking at that Earth population, we are facing a huge third quarter phenomenon ourselves as soon as we pass 65 or 70 years old. And not just with elderly, among younger generations, again, rates of depression are rising. And there you see those AI solutions coming in, and where you see it is starting to help on Earth. But these topics, loneliness, depression, are often still taboo topics. So let's get back to our ambition to explore space and our need for medical autonomy. The value of this cycle is translating insights from Earth to space, and in the other way around as well. We regard astronauts as being role models. We put them on a pedestal and we ask for them to inspire generations of youth. So I believe that if we can show that astronauts are benefiting from using these new solutions, it will lower a barrier for people on Earth. Instead of the other way around, now people would say, if this could work in space, it might just work for me down here. That's why I started the Health in Space series. It's a webinar series on health in space topics where I invited engineers, the designers, astronauts, researchers to discuss various space health topics and ask them about their relation with terrestrial healthcare. And here you see some of the previous ones. We had one about medical emergencies in deep space, going back to those questions I asked earlier. What do you do with an appendicitis? Here we had former astronaut Dave Williams from Canada talking about how it is to be the crew medical officer on board. I have an episode about women's health in space specifically, and here's an upcoming episode, February 25, on food for space for our next generation space missions. So I'd like to make this transfer of knowledge and this learning cycle happen. It is my mission to let humans survive and thrive in outer space and eventually go up there myself. Luckily, the European Space Agency is starting to look for new recruits again, as was publicly announced last week, again after a 12-year waiting period. So I'll be applying. I regularly tweet about tech developments in healthcare innovation and on the boundaries of space and health. So if you like to follow these, here are some handles. Also, if you are interested in the Space Generation Advisory Council webinar series that I just mentioned, for those of you who want to follow along, that find me here or virtually. And we have posted most of our episodes on YouTube as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and give it back to Cecilia.
Hi, Jules. Thank you very much for sharing your vision. Well, it seems like everything has been pretty well explained with great details. I think that our guests do not have any questions for now, and if so, you can write them down in the chat. Or if any questions arises in the future, also you can contact us. So don't hesitate to connect with us. Let's see if we have any question.
I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Perfect. All right. Well, as I mentioned before, in the case any question arises in the future, just let us know and we'll try to give you an answer as soon as possible. We have very good comments. People thanking you, Jules.
Thank you.
Well, if there is any more comment, thank you very much again for sharing your vision about this very interesting topic. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, Cecilia. And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, Twitter, if you have any questions later as well. And I'll try to respond them or connect. And I'm open to anything. So just let me know.
We have one question here.
Okay.
Has there been much research regarding how certain biometrics behave in